Hi, it's Les and Wendy back again for another video with a special guest today who Wendy's going to introduce here.
So yes, the locals here, they need no introduction. John G. Kelly here, he's an author, a historian, a lawyer, a professor, but today we're just going to pick your brain about St. John, and we are so honored to actually sit down and talk to you. Every time I reach out to a group on Facebook and ask them a question about the city, your name pops up as the guy to ask, and of course you do some walking tours prior to COVID, and so when I saw that you were doing a walking tour today, I had to come out and meet you for sure. So thank you so much for talking with us. Did you want to just maybe give a little...
Sure, a little bit of a background.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm a third generation St. Johner. In other words, my grandfather lived on Douglas Avenue just behind us. My father was born and lived on Douglas Avenue just behind us, and I was born and brought up and lived on Douglas Avenue just behind us. And that's very much the culture and heritage and history of St. John and St. John families. Yes, my background is that, like many people, I did grow up here, and for various reasons that happened during, we'll say, the 60s and 70s, I did go to Toronto for a period of time and was a law professor there and did a number of other things related to that. But like everybody who comes from St. John, whenever we meet St. Johners, all we want to talk about is St. John. And so I've come home. I've come home. I'm a Bay of Fundy boy who's come home to St. John, and I'm so delighted to be here.
Good. So we have a few questions for you.
Sure.
Some of them are quite general, but do you want to explain why St. John is called the Loyalist City?
Well, it's called the Loyalist City because after, of course, the American Revolution, the winners kicked out the losers, and the losers were, of course, the aristocrats, in other words, who backed the king at that point in time. Now, a select group of them, approximately 5,000, were basically offered the opportunity to come to St. John. In other words, they were given land here and said, if you come to St. John, you can come. So they did come here and came to St. John. Among those, by the way, just to mention it, was a man with the famous Benedict Arnold, who was the spy for the king. He came to St. John and lived in St. John after the Revolution. So they came here and basically were very well educated. These were the people that set up Harvard, Yale, and all the Ivy League schools. They were now living here. So they said, well, let's basically do something imaginative. Let's create North America's first incorporated city.
Ooh,
and
yes.
called it St. John. And that's basically how the Loyalists came and basically why St. John is Canada's Loyalist city.
Excellent. So you told us a little bit about the history of how the city incorporated.
Yeah.
Do you want to just give us a quick synopsis on?
Well, what did happen shortly after that, I mean, if you want to take the first 100 years, now this was 1785, all right, so we've got a lot of ground to cover here over a couple of hundred years, but what then happened is that, of course, the Loyalists were very astute business people. And at that time as well, the British were requiring all of these tall timbers because, of course, Britain was in this 200-year war with France and Spain and all of this stuff. So the Loyalists said, well, we know where to get these timbers. They're all around us. And so St. John became the major timber source for all of the British warships, in other words, which became a source of wealth. And also, St. John, by 1850, was the largest seaport in all of North America. In other words, because along with the timbers, they were exporting and importing all kinds of goods that went with that. So that basically became a great source of wealth. And as you know, from walking around St. John to this day, you'll see some of these homes that were built during the 1800s. You'll say, my goodness,
Gorgeous.
where did these mansions come from?
Totally.
And that basically is the origin of that initial period.
Wow. So something everybody always asks us, why is it called Uptown and not downtown?
Well, that's because what happened was when the Loyalists came, you know, we look at the start, actually there was no Uptown, all right? In other words, what became St. John was actually Portland, which was, we'll say, the North End today.
Okay.
And so when the Loyalists came, they said, well, now, wait a minute now. This is already taken, so we're going to be moving to a different part of town. And of course, where we live will be the Uptown. Because, and you can still see remnants of that today. If you go through like the formal South End and Uptown St. John with the famous squares and everything, you say, oh my gosh, you know, this looks like sort of like a British city or something. And that's where the Uptown downtown came from.
Especially the parks with the how is it designed?
The Union Jacks.
The Union Jacks.
Yeah.
So that is that's just incredible. And so another quick question: why is the beach at the new Irving Nature Park? It's called Saints Rest.
Yeah.
We have so many people who have asked us that question. Why is it named Saints Rest?
Well,
Beach?
nobody really knows the answer. So this is all folklore.
Okay.
So some people like me, who is Irish, of Irish Catholic ascendancy, say it was called Saints Rest because when, particularly the wave of Irish immigrants came in, and thousands came in here, particularly during the potato famine and places like that, this is where the saints could be called to rest as they came in. Now that's one story, if you so to speak.
Okay.
The other story was called Saints Rest is because with the tremendous tides of the Bay of Fundy, not exaggerated, but there were shipwrecks and things of that sort. So in other words, Saints Rest is where they are today. And of course now it's no longer Saints Rest, it's the J.D. Irving Memorial Parkway. But it's a beautiful parkway, a beautiful walking park.
Oh, it's gorgeous. But the locals still call it.
Oh, everybody calls it. Like my wife is not a local, she's from Toronto, and she didn't know it was called Saints Rest. And I said, and the other day I happened to say to her, we could always go over to Saints Rest for a walk. I said, I mean the Irving, Irving Park or something for that. And by the way, just I want to put a little ad in because I live in for the Irving part of this is that St. John is one of the few cities, and I'll say the country, and maybe even more than that. How many places do have wonderful walk-through parks in the middle of their city? And St. John is one of the cities that has this.
Yeah, it's absolutely gorgeous there. If anybody that has come into town hasn't actually visited that park, it's just amazing.
Sure.
So now, what are a few things about St. John that not many people know about?
Well, of course, not many people, like we talked a little bit about the Loyalist thing, and not many people know that. A number of people also aren't aware of the fact that until the early 1900s, St. John was more or less the second wealthiest manufacturing place in the country, with all of these industries that were going on that were somehow related or offsprings of shipping. A number of other things that other people don't know is that we now talk about the Ukraine being the breadbasket of the world. It was actually Canada that was the breadbasket for Europe after all the wars. And the breadbasket was in St. John, New Brunswick. That's where they had all the huge grain terminals, where the grain was shipped from here to Europe and back. And so that was those are some of the things that people aren't aware of. And today people also aren't aware of is that until the creation of the St. Lawrence Seaway, St. John was, of course, Canada's winter port. And there were 3,000 stevedores that worked 24 hours a day all through the winter months to sort of bring in all these goods from all over the world into the city. So in a way, St. John was a very sophisticated city. In other words, having people that knew how to do this kind of global international business.
Mm-hmm. Now you had spoken about how as time progressed, industry moved out and things started to decay.
Sure.
Can you explain that process?
Yeah, sure. What began to happen, I guess we can't specify what came first, but we'll say up until for example, for all of you people that are watching this and don't live in New Brunswick, the next time, if you're particularly anywhere east of Alberta, take a walk down through one of your old neighborhoods and look at a fire hydrant. And you'll see, where's that fire hydrant come? It's Macavity Grenadier from St. John, New Brunswick. So in other words, St. John was a great manufacturing center, of course, was the major shipbuilding center and all of these things. Now, for a number of reasons, the St. Lawrence Seaway came along. Manufacturing just began to focus and concentrate more or less in Ontario, with all of the growth of the provinces and the steel mills and all those kind of things. And so what began to happen is that over a 10-year period, I don't have the exact numbers, but I would say between 5,000 and 10,000 jobs just disappeared. Like St. John was a major sugar refinery for Eastern Canada. That shut down. The winter port declined with the St. Lawrence Seaway. St. John Shipbuilding and Dry Dock was displaced by the government, who for a number of reasons decided that they wanted Halifax to be the shipping center because the Navy was there, which was, say, understandable in one sense. So we can go through a list of these things. And so by the time we get, we'll say, to the 1970s, St. John was economically a city that was in decline.
Right.
Now, and I want to add this just to make it so important, but what never declined was the spirit and culture of the people who live in St. John.
Yes, that's the one thing that we've noticed the most since we've been here. We've embraced the St. John culture, and not all the cities in the Maritimes are the same. St. John's quite unique with its culture, and we're probably going to touch on that when we talk about your book.
Okay.
But I just also wanted to ask you, sorry, I have to look at my notes
No,
here.
fine.
There is, okay, so what do you see as the major factor that will drive future growth in St. John, do you think?
Well, there are a number of things that will drive future growth in St. John. First of all is the fact that we are now moving into this, we want to call it post-pandemic, of a new economy. There's all kinds of labels for it. But St. John is ideally positioned to become a major, I don't want to call it major, but like we'll say a player in all of these things. So for example, what a lot of people aren't aware of is that St. John is one of the major call centers for across the country. And why is that? Because we're officially a bilingual province, and there are people in this city who are very conversant in French and English. And so that's an example of the kind of thing that is now, it has been going on, but that is now happening. Another reason that St. John will basically and can begin to thrive is because it's a city that has a wonderful legacy. And you may or may not know, and some of your viewers probably are aware of this, is that, for example, Maclean's magazine did a feature last month talking about the 10 places people would like to live in if they weren't living in, quite frankly, Vancouver and Toronto. And out of those came the Bay of Fundy and St. Andrews, which is actually just down the road. It's all part of the Bay of Fundy. And this became one of the 10 places that people are saying, oh my God, wouldn't it be wonderful to live in a city with this kind of culture? Where, now, for all of you people who live particularly in Toronto and Vancouver, what you should know is that if you're standing out on a sidewalk and you think you might like to cross the street, cars are going to stop and they're going to go ahead, cross the street. See what I'm getting at? And that's, or people are surprised when they come here, and if someone dies, there's actually this isn't morbid, like it's very friendly. There's a funeral procession that takes place, and everyone basically just stops for a minute and pays respects to that person. So that tells you that there's this respect, you see what I mean, for people, and people like one another. Now, also, when people first come here, which is wonderful, of course, because St. John, up until 1960, had the largest Irish per capita population of any place in North America, even more than Boston. And so we all talk with that sing-song Irish accent, which people find sort of amusing. Oh my gosh, why do these people talk? Ooh, ooh, ooh. And well, then I say to them, well, then if you want to find out we talk that way, you go to Dublin. And you'll
Been there, loved it too.
Yeah, and you'll talk to people that are just like us. And then, quite frankly, the other reason that St. John has great potential, we'll say, for like millennials and Generation Z, and that is that, yeah, you know, people are becoming, and it's not for everybody, there's certainly always going to be like a Toronto and a Montreal and a Vancouver, and I'm very proud that we have those and want to keep them going. But an increasing number of people are looking for alternatives, you know, where they say, wait a minute, I don't necessarily see myself as wanting to become like a multi-millionaire and be part of a great industrial complex. I mean, I would like to have a life where, one, I live by an ocean, because as we do know, people that live by oceans are the happiest people in the world. I mean, that's well known scientifically. So I can live beside this ocean, and more importantly, I can live beside this incredible highest tides in the world, where 50 feet of water come in and out every day, and I see all of these things happen. And so that's part of it. And also, and this is true, people are saying, my gosh, wait a minute, you're telling me that this $2 million home that was in Toronto is only like $500,000 in St. John, New Brunswick. And so
affordable.
They're saying this is, now, it's not just that it's affordable, but you're not necessarily living in the backwoods. You're living in the city.
Yes.
You see what I mean? Like, and you're
With all
living
amenities,
with all the amenities that are in the city, and yet you're, and I don't want to say a drive, it's not a 5-minute drive, it's a 15-minute walk to a park. No one who lives in this city is more than a 15-minute walk away from a park or the ocean.
Yeah.
And that is a very nice feature.
Oh,
Those are all wonderful things to have going for you.
I love it. And so, sorry, go ahead.
Do you think tourism will also become bigger here as we embrace that sort of industry?
Well, tourism, you know, and I'll say it this way, can become bigger. And one of the things that I'm doing is coming back to St. John, and actually, like people my age do in my generation, involved in what I call an encore career. And what my mission is basically to talk about why St. John is not just a wonderful place to live in, but is quite a place to visit. And so, for example, for people who say to themselves, gee, I wonder what it's like to sort of like be in this famous part of like Boston and go up the bay and all these other things. Well, take a walk along Jermyn Street and you say, oh my God,
so
this looks like
gorgeous
I'm in the
there.
middle of New York. This looks like,
Yeah.
but you're not. You just have to walk around the corner and you're in this, I'm saying, very livable, manageable city. So those things are certainly there that are waiting to be developed, you know, when I'm saying tourism-wise. And what a lot of people aren't aware of, even though, and I'm very proud of the fact, is that, of course, although we have Pier 21 in Halifax, the first major sort of refugee take-in place, or center if you want to call it, is not Ellis Island. It's Partridge Island, St. John, New Brunswick.
Yeah.
Partridge Island took in more than 5 million immigrants, 5 million
Yes.
immigrants. Now, Ellis Island took in 25 million, but it was built 50 years later using Partridge Island as the example.
yeah.
So St. John has a model for all of these things that are there that we haven't really, I don't think, brought to people's attention. And so, for example, you may or may not know this, but the model for all museums in Canada is the New Brunswick Museum on Douglas Avenue, which was built in 1934 in the
Beautiful
Depression.
building, yeah.
And that became the model for all museums across the country. And yet it's, when I say it sits there, we should be sort of exploiting that, that kind of thing when we go through that. Now, the other thing that's there is that Canada's first endowed Carnegie Library, the famous Carnegie Foundation, was the St. John Public Library, which is basically now sits sort of empty, just basically on Hayes Street in Uptown St. John. And that's something, in fact, for those of you that live in Toronto, if you're coming here for a visit, first of all, go to the Royal Alexandra Theatre, the famous theatre in Toronto, and walk up the archway to the steps into that theatre. Then come to St. John and walk up the archway and steps into the original St. John Public Library. The Royal Alexandra Theatre modeled its entrance.
Oh, there you go.
So we have all of these things here, when I say tourism-wise or just public interest-wise, that are basically waiting to be, I don't want to use the word exploited because that's not what I'm talking about. We're not talking about having Ferris wheels and roller coaster rides here, but we're talking about how you can basically sort of do this. The other thing that I think is available where people can bring their families and children is that, tourism-wise, this is a wonderful place just to bring a family.
Yes. Much to do.
Yeah,
right?
my wife and I are RVers. We're Airstreamers. We one of those silver bullet Airstreams, and we've stayed in RV parks. All over North America, and without trying to run any other park down, St. John has a wonderful urban RV park, and you actually can park your RV in the St. John, in Lily Lake in the RV park, and guess what? You don't even have to drive your car. You can just walk up the hill, and all of a sudden you're in the middle of the city. And then when you get tired and say, oh my gosh, I've walked enough, you then just stand on the edge of the park and you look out over the entire Bay of Fundy.
Yes.
And
it's amazing.
Yeah.
And if you get hungry, you don't even have to drive anywhere because Lily's is right down the street,
right.
and you can have a nice
That's
cold
right.
pint
Sure.
with your dinner. And
Now, something else, though, that this is particular to me because I grew up in St. John when it was still a major industrial center, is that what we, when I say have to become aware of and learn to better appreciate as Canadians particularly, certainly St. John is still an industrial center. And for those of you who are coming in from the area of the West, how you're going to know you're in St. John is when you get closer, all of a sudden you're going to see these great big smokestacks with basically effluent coming out. That's basically the J.D. Irving pulp mill, tissue mill. Now, and people say, oh my gosh. But it's important that we begin to sort of fully appreciate how important industry is, and more important, I guess more importantly, excuse me for the double inflection on it, how St. John is a key provider. And so the 5th largest lumber company in all of Canada is not in BC or Ontario, it's J.D. Irving in New Brunswick. In other words, it's an incredible thing to see how that operates. So by way of, and I'm not, by the way, I do not work for Irving, so I'm not here promoting the products, but what I'm trying to say is that there is something that we're sometimes missing in tourism today, where people think that they either have to go into the woods, which is great to do, or that they have to go to kind of like major, kind of entertainment centers like Canada's Wonderland or something like that, which I'm not against going to. But there's also something to be said for learning to appreciate how important industry is to basically make a city and a community work. And that is what makes, not everything, but that's certainly an important part, and it's an important thing you can see now, which we didn't have, and I just want to put this in, it's so important. We just stopped it. But up until a few years ago, Irving Pulp and Paper used to run tours in the summer, and could actually go through the mill and see how New Brunswick was a major maker of pulp and paper and hardwood, and we were going on across the country. Those are some of the things that are here.
I think I prefer the Moosehead tour myself.
But let's, and the other thing that I think I want to just talk about, because people always mention this, is that Canada's oldest independent brewery is Moosehead Breweries in St. John, New Brunswick. And if you want to see how an historic brewery operates, you can take a tour of Moosehead Breweries in St. John. The other thing that people sometimes aren't fully aware of is that one of Canada's foremost, if you like cider companies is basically Yip Cider. Which was basically originated from the Mackay family of Pitfield Mackay Rossi Investment Company. One of the grandsons went up to Long Reach in the Kingston Peninsula and started this whole big apple production orchard farm thing. And now they're a major producer of cider. So those are the kind of things you can see. So what you're able to see in St. John, if you take the time to look around, is just how these things are there. And this is important for us to appreciate as Canadians, as we're becoming more and more aware as a country. And I'm not running for public office, but how we as a country, have to learn to become more conscious of who we are and the contributions we can make, rather than just becoming a place that gets goods from, I don't want to belittle it, but from China and other places. So that's some of the things that we can do.
Awesome. Sorry, you
Go ahead.
have the question?
No, I was just going to say that this is the first time we've met John, and we are very honored to meet him. A lot of what I'm hearing from him is kind of similar to our top 10 reasons to move to St. John, but John's just much more eloquent than we are.
So John, so we actually, we're here to do a little tour here of St. Peter's Church, because you're a North End boy, and so you wrote a book, and I'd like, if you wouldn't mind, just kind of talking about it a bit and letting us know when there's some more upcoming walking tours, because that's why we're actually here, is to do your walking tour.
This is the book, Meaningful Memories. Okay, by John G. Kelly. Here's the subtitle: Rekindling Past Learning Experiences to Live Life to the Fullest. Now, the past learning experiences, why I wrote this book, my past learning experiences, there's some other things in there, but most of them, many of them, are all about what a tremendous life I had and what's called fail, my first attempts at learning. How many things I learned growing up by living in a community like this. And then when I went on into my adult life, how I was basically able to go back and think of these things and obviously utilize them as a person living and having a career in a professional and personal life, and how I basically benefited from them and learned how to live life to the fullest. And that basically is, and the book, as you maybe can tell from the way I'm talking to you, I'm not really an historian, I'm a raconteur. And a raconteur basically talks about what the important memory of something was that occurred. I mean, not that it's inaccurate, but this thing is not like a date-written book. I mean, it basically is, okay, here's an event that happened, and this is why it had an impact on me. And so when you read this, the book is also basically a primer for how you can say, now wait a minute, I had things happen in my life too, meaningful memories. How can I then do what John has done and sort of make these, ignite my passion and live my life to the fullest? Now, I hope some of you do that by moving to St. John, but obviously it's not just about doing it in St. John.
So what I love about this is your acronym is actually an oxymoron in sorts, right?
Yeah.
Because it's more of a positive thing that you kind of tap into past experiences in order to fuel your passion in life, right? So I love that. Now, what about your walking tours? What's coming up?
What's going to happen is this. In fact, I talked about relocating and coming back to St. John. In fact, my daughter has always lived here, and so I've been coming to St. John always, for whatever, 50, aside from growing up here for the 45 years I was away, I've always been coming back here. So now that I've come back to St. John, and part of it come back was I wrote this book, as being part of the mission, is basically to work with people and empower people and do it myself to basically sort of rekindle and sort of sort of show people what a wonderful heritage we have in this city and how they can come here and be part of that. Because as you know, because you moved here, people should also know St. John is a very welcoming city.
It sure is.
And I'm going to say something. If you buy or rent a house and are living in it, within a week or maybe even sooner than that, there's going to be a knock on your door, and someone's going to say, "Hi,
Yes.
your next door neighbor."
Exactly.
And who are you? And
Yeah.
what can I do to, we're not help, but
Yeah.
what can we do to become friends? And
Yeah.
so that part of it is also very important today, because as we know, particularly with social media, I mean, it sounds great in some respects, but it's isolated so many of us. And so by living in a place like St. John, you can kind of get out of that isolation into your community and become part of active community living.
Yeah.
And there is no place like St. John. St. John is as individual as Mr. Kelly is. But could you let us know where people can find your book?
Sure. You can go to Indigo, of course, if you're in St. John, Indigo here. But if you go to, because it's listed with Indigo, if you're following this video from Ontario or BC, go to your local Indigo store, and tell them that you'd like them to bring in the book. And I'm also just going to give you this website. If you just go to www.johngkelly.ca, is the name of the book, johngkelly.ca, you can actually get the book online,
Oh, there you
from
go.
me as well. And you can, and actually, what you'll also get when you do that, you'll see my own little, sort of video there and things of this sort that talk about like who I am and a little bit about like why I've come back, and I'm excited about making this, bringing out all of these wonderful things about this community for all of us.
It's fantastic.
Yeah, that's amazing. I cannot thank you enough for taking time out and speaking with us. You've never met us before. I reached out to you and I was hoping that I'd be able to talk to you and stuff, so thank you so much.
Oh, and sure, what I want to encourage people to do, because I really admire what you two are doing as well, the mission you've taken on, is basically,
you.
certainly, and we haven't talked much about this, but I am hoping that perhaps we'll begin liaising together, and maybe I can make a contribution to not just to some of your videos, but to other little written things and things on the video, and actually will give people an opportunity. And if you want to find out more about me or about St. John, or say, gee, what's this or what's that, or why should I move, you can certainly do it through them. They'll contact me, and I
Yes.
am not a real estate agent, so there's no commission in this, but I would be happy to basically respond to that and say, okay, here's why I think maybe you should give this place a look, or here's why you should do this.
That's amazing, because as realtors with Royal Page St. Atlantic, we always, with our buyers and stuff, we're always looking for guys, right? We call them guys, like painters and
sure.
contractors and stuff, and now we have a guy, a knowledge guy.
A raconteur.
Well,
Yes.
our contour, and so and so if you say, well, I'm looking at a property and someone had told me that I should look to moving to the west side, then you can ask me about that, and I'll say, well, even though I'm a North Ender, well,
Yes,
there are some
yes.
nice places on the west side,
Yes.
or more, and as I say, I'm happy to sort of share all that with everybody.
Oh, amazing. Thank you so
yes.
much.
And we are going to I'm going to do a series of walking tours
Oh,
all through
good.
the fall, and certainly I encourage you to come with me on some of them.
Yes.
And actually, if somebody is saying, well, gee, maybe we should take a holiday in St. John for a couple of weeks and check this out, yeah, come on the tour.
So
Okay.
you're going to post them in our Facebook group,
Yes,
right?
I'd like to post them in your Facebook group.
Okay, great. Which is We Love St. John, so you can join the group, and that's how I found out about this walking tour, is that you actually
Sure.
posted it in our group, so that was great. But you are such a pleasure to talk to, and I'm so glad that we caught up with you, because you are another reason why we love St. John.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for allowing me to take the opportunity to spend some time with you, because
Awesome.
now you can tell by look at the spirit. Okay, look at her. She's living in St. John now.
Exactly.
And she's happy and she's smiling. All right, and we become friends. See, look at
Yes.
that. We've
Oh,
become friends.
awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, John. Bye, everyone.